On Point is brought to you by Crow Jamaica.
A very good evening and welcome to another episode of On Point. I'm Patria Kay.
And I'm Dennis Chung.
And we've got a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
The PNP leadership race is behind us. Dr. Peter Phillips narrowly walking away with the win, but a win nevertheless.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that have happened internationally too. We spoke about Bahamas. I mean, the news just keeps getting worse and worse. And Trump is now saying that they're not welcome there. You know, so it is just a devastating thing for them. I mean, when you look at the pictures now, up to 50 confirmed dead already and 100 still missing. You know, they are having much more serious problems than we are with our internal PNP election.
Absolutely. Another thing happening here in Jamaica in the week, a new kind of crime that we're seeing, a hostage situation that would have played out. You cuss the police when they do a bad job, but you also must lift the hat to them when they do a good job as well. There were no injuries, and they handled the situation with a kind of professionalism.
Let me also say, Patria, that talking about the police, since the change has been made from Welch to Blake, they're looking a lot better out on the roads. The roads are very much more organized. I mean, coming to work in the back to school time, the roads are pretty much better than they usually are.
Traffic certainly is being managed well.
Being managed much better. The problem that occurred recently is really just because of the rains.
Absolutely, but those were huge problems. We saw all kinds of things floating. We saw roads that weren't flooded before flooding now. And a lot of that is a garbage problem. When you hear Stephen Shaw talk and say, it's nastiness that's blocking some of these drains.
And there's something, as Chairman Ennis told me, I've been talking about for a long time. People do not dispose of their garbage properly. And you cannot have enough resources, you cannot have enough trucks to accommodate people not disposing properly of their garbage.
Well, we have a lot to talk about. For the show today, we're going to be zeroing in on the PNP leadership race. It was a bloody battle. Can the PNP unite and move forward with a united front after this election? How do they put the pieces together? We're going to be talking to some political commentators and Venetia Phillips about that.
But before we go forward with that, we're going to take a look back at some of the top business stories of the week.
At number 5, U.S. President Donald Trump has fired his national security advisor John Bolton. Reports are that the sacking is tied to a disagreement over the possible easing of U.S. sanctions on Iran. President Donald Trump announced via Twitter on Tuesday that he had fired Bolton, saying he had strongly disagreed with many of Bolton's hawkish positions. At number 4, Britain's Queen Elizabeth has approved a law blocking a no-deal exit from the European Union at the end of October. This means that Prime Minister Boris Johnson must now ask for an extension or get a deal. Earlier, he visited Ireland and made a rare admission that a no-deal exit would be a failure of diplomacy. At number 3, Apple unveiled its newest iPhone this week, calling it the phone that will change the game forever. The iPhone Pro has a triple camera that Apple says will create the perfect photograph. Analysts say with the new iPhone, the technology industry's battleground of smartphone cameras has moved to inside the phone, where sophisticated artificial intelligence software and special chips play a major role in how a phone's photos look. At number 2, Seprat is contemplating exporting gluten-free flour made from cassava. This could become a reality as early as next year if a deal is struck with Red Stripe. Currently, Red Stripe engages hundreds of cassava farmers in its Project Grow initiative, which sees cassava being used as a major ingredient in its beer production process. And at number 1 this week, Dr. Peter Phillips was returned as leader of the People's National Party (PNP) after a bruising leadership contest against Peter Bunting. The PNP leader has called for unity in the party and has promised that no one will be sidelined.
When we come back on point, how does the PNP move forward after the Peter versus Peter challenge? After the break, we find out. Welcome back to On Point. The PNP leadership race finally came to an end last week, Saturday, but that was after weeks of intense battle.
It was a battle for the heart and soul of the People's National Party PNP, one that left many bruises and some deep wounds. It all began when Peter Bunting announced he would be challenging Dr. Peter Phillips for the leadership of the party. Bunting dubbed his campaign Rise United, pushing the mantra, "We can win." The Bunting campaign argued that their candidate was the best shot the PNP had at winning the next general election and unseating the Jamaica Labour Party. They claimed their candidate was more likable and was better able to attract young people to the party. Meanwhile, the incumbent Dr. Peter Phillips, who was in a fight for his political life, built his campaign on the argument that he was tried, tested, and proven. His slogan, "One PNP, powerful together." For several weeks, both campaigns traded political jabs. There were allegations of vote buying and intimidation, coupled with insults on social media. On September 7, it was time for the delegates to speak. Both sides pulled out all the stops to get their delegates out to vote. After the polls closed, the incumbent triumphed with a 76-vote margin. However, healing a fractured party will not be easy, but both sides have expressed a willingness to at least begin talks.
Joining us now are Councillor for the Papine Division, Venetia Phillips, and political commentator, Helene Davis-White. Welcome to On Point, ladies.
Ladies,
Thanks for having me.
let me first start with you, Helene Davis-White. 76 votes were the difference between both Peters.
Yes.
What does that say to you?
I think one of the things that it says clearly is that within the PNP, whatever it was that Peter Bunting was speaking to resonated with almost half of the delegates of the PNP. And so while it is that Dr. Peter Phillips came out with a win, I think he will have to do everything to ensure that that half who clearly understood and were also taken with whatever it was that Bunting was bringing, that Phillips will have to try to ensure that everything is done to ensure that whatever was raised by the Bunting camp is actually addressed, and that efforts will be made to make sure that that camp, if you may want to call it that, is integrated, or some people say reintegrated into the party for sure.
Venetia, what does it mean for you?
I've seen many elections, internal and external. If you want to start with the external, the mayor is the mayor of Kingston because of one vote, not 100 votes or 10 votes, one vote. And that by no means dilutes his authority of office. It's no different internally. A bit disappointed with the results, but an ugly win, a pretty win is a win. The party, regardless of the margin, would need to undertake the healing process quickly to be able to deal with the JLP sufficiently to be able to take power from the Jamaica Labour Party. Of course, that is already on the way. The party president has met with Comrade Bunting, and both of them will now have to move across the country to ensure that the comrades, not just the delegates, but the comrades, all understand that the campaign is over and it is now time for one PNP moving as a united force together to take Jamaica back.
But let me ask though, Helene, I want to put a different spin on it. I agree that Dr. Phillips has an awesome responsibility because he has to reach across the aisle, but not give up his ideas while he's doing it, because he's a leader, right? But some would say that one of the reasons why Bunting came so close was because he had more financial resources than Dr. Phillips. What would your view be on that, though?
Well, that has been a feature of politics in Jamaica for a very long time. I remember Peter Portia, that there was the influence of money at that time as well. I mean, delegates could recount for me what they received. And within the JLP, a similar thing. Within the general elections, a similar thing. And I personally have become concerned because there are members of the electorate who will tell you that their vote is in fact for sale. And if you're not coming with something, they are not interested. And that's a concern for me. So it is a reality that is not only something for this contest, but for politics and the conduct of politics in Jamaica generally.
You see, Venetia, that has always been one of the things I think. I don't, a lot of people put the blame on politicians, but for me, it is the people, the electorate, because a politician, like any other person who's selling something, will give you what you desire. And you said it very clearly, Helena. I want Venetia to comment on it. Is the problem really our electorate then? And the fact that we just, we can be bought out easily?
I would want to put it at the feet squarely of the politicians. And here is why. Internally, externally, I think when you have vulnerable people, socioeconomically, and you dangle before them the carrots in the form of money or goods or whatever it is that you use to buy them, then basically you most of the times you take them to that point where you break them. Because if, for example, a person, whether for internal elections or external election, is being offered $20,000, $30,000, they're unemployed, or even if they're employed, they don't have $20,000 or $30,000 at home, but they're in that line to vote and they're offered, even $10,000 that they didn't have before. What exactly is there? Ideology, whatever it is that you want to put on the table, message, the bread and butter is what they're confronted with. Do I stick with the message and go home to nothing? Or do I take this because regardless of what I do, it doesn't matter? Because the whole business of persons voting based on issues, based on message, that is slowly eroding, and that bothers me. But it is because those in authority, the political persons, those seeking office, those seeking power, they are using the weakness of the people to actually gut them of their dignity.
Were votes sold or bought in this election?
If I'm to be honest, absolutely. We have accounts by delegates. And the reality is, for me to sit here and tell you that it didn't happen would be hypocritical.
On both sides?
On both sides. I'm sure persons, even if from the official One PNP campaign, I can tell you, one, we never had that kind of money to do that. But there might have been persons who think that they're assisting the process and would have, because in an election, it doesn't always have to be the organized campaign team that does this. And I've seen this time and time again. There are those persons who are on the wings, if you want to call them that, who also participate in this kind of thing. And the more we continue to see it happening internally, is the more the external politics is going to be grossly affected and to our detriment. Because if a comrade said to me the other night, I hope I same way so not have the money, haha. I didn't even, until he said that was a song. He said, I hope the money, haha, same way for general election, So I pulled him over and I said to him, what you mean? And him said, well, if the money tall up, no. It have a taller for the general, because that is the big one and we're going for office. And I was puzzled. I pulled over another senior comrade and pointed the comrade to what was being said to me. And I said, as a candidate myself, thankfully, he was not from my constituency, but I said, look at what that other candidate is going to be faced with. And so these are persons who are going to be saying to their candidates, that listen to me, you found the money for internal election, so you need to find it. No.
People press back on the People's National Party and say it's all well and good for you to sit here and chastise that behavior now, but it wasn't chastised in the middle of the election.
It was. You can raise it as much as you want to. People will not always adhere to the rules. And so the reality is that when we sat at the table, certainly I represented the One PNP team at the table to, discuss the extent to which money could be used in these internal elections with Dr. Phillips and Comrade Bunting. And while I'm not going to go into that discussion, I must tell you that I was saddened by the almost acceptance that, we shouldn't fight so hard against money being in the politics. And that almost brought me to tears, because I was saying, are we not understanding that we are removing message, we're removing substance from elections in Jamaica, and we're turning into who is able to buy the most? And so when you have a critical decision to make, the people will say, show me the money. They won't even want to understand what is at stake.
Helene, how do you feel about what you're hearing?
Well, I think it just confirms what I think a lot of us know has been happening in the politics for a very long time. But I am old enough to remember the campaign of the 1980s going into 89. And I remember Michael Manley had something that says, "Nyam them out and boops them out," kind of thing, because it was there from then, yeah? You may use all kinds of inducements.
You mean like an endowment fund or something like that?
There are all kinds of inducements that are used, and some persons would come up with programs that people would want to be associated with or benefit from.
Why wouldn't the voter simply do that? Name the vote and vote who you want to vote for. Why does it work?
I think this is one of the reasons why I don't believe it was so much the influence of money in this campaign, because certainly in the Peter Portia campaigns, there were scenes of persons going in with one T-shirt and coming out with another. So they clearly went and voted their mind, although they were being supported.
Well, it depends on when you pay the money.
I was about to say, I beg to differ with Eileen on that. It's based on what was promised and how it was promised, because I can tell you some of the stuff we heard was, like a partial payment now and the final payment when the results are counted. And so when it is done in that kind of a way, when it's reported, because these are the things that, you get reports on, because when we were looking at the numbers, I can tell you that at 2 o'clock, since I was managing the floor, I can tell you at 2 o'clock, I had sent the message outside and we had started celebrating. That was just a little bit ahead of the alternate voters coming in. And so we started, I sent out the message of jubilation and celebration started, but then I just started to see a sea of black coming through the doors. And I remember I said to myself, I don't like this. But, I continued to flow and to work the floor. And being a little bit experienced enough to understand numbers, I was saying to myself, you know what? Not everybody is going to, as you say, take whatever is offered, but do what we consider to be the right thing. Mm-hmm. And so I decided to work the lines. And even as you work the lines, some of the things that came back to you was like, but Lord, comrade, the two of them are PNP, so it not really matter who win, because then it is also the pitch. So even as you induce by whatever means, the pitch also helps to kind of, in an internal election, put them at that place so they don't have that attack of conscience to say, boy, it's too PNP anyway, so I don't have to feel that bad. So,
well, let me ask you, Helene, isn't this something that is going to affect us? Because it means then that we're not putting people up based on ideas and issues, right, which is going to affect how the country is governed, but rather based on the fact that we want to eat our food next week.
That's really what it is, because if you remember, even the last election campaign, the big inducement for voters was 1.5, was it?
Yes.
That was a big inducement, even although a lot of persons never understood it. Yeah. That was the big inducement for a lot of voters. And I think one of the things is that we have to recognize that you're dealing with the conduct of politics in a totally different paradigm, yeah? And you can't believe that everybody is going to be just thinking about what is coming through policies and so on. Some people really just want something for themselves personally. That's really what they want.
And what does the country do to protect itself from this? They sign codes of conduct. We have watchdog agencies. We have the political ombudsman. What else do we need to do?
Unless and until those structures actually are tested and work, because this thing about inducement to vote is not a Jamaican thing, it's a worldwide thing. But in more developed societies, they have rules and laws, and if you break them, there are consequences, yeah? I think the problem in Jamaica is that we have these and there is no real implementation. So you have a code of conduct, but I have not heard of anybody really. I mean, we have had meetings and so on, but nobody, because I'm going to bet you the PNP elections have ended. I don't think that the comrades are going to be going out there pressing for any action to be taken. I can say
Well,
what.
that is a question I want to ask. You know, Venish, as someone who was in the one PNP campaign, and you should know what's happening. Will you set up structures to bring penalties against people who do that?
And I'm going to add to the question, because there's a whole matter of integrity that is very important in the conversation of today's politics.
Yes.
Very important, not just on your side, but there's a moral authority with which the PNP wants to speak about absence of integrity on other space, in other spaces, that you can't come and talk to the people of Jamaica about integrity, knowing full well what happened in your internal election.
It is corruption. It cannot be called by any other name. It is what it is, and let us face it. I mean, certainly, my constituency, in terms of the discussion that we're having, we intend to, through the NEC, put the question on the table to the NEC in terms of what should happen. There are cases that we're certain of. In terms of the level of vulgarity we saw, I mean, it is something that, as a constituency of Eastern St. Andrew, we will definitely be placing on the table at NEC. But I am also equally as certain that it will form part of the agenda at NEC, because it is of great concern to the party for two reasons. We have the public actually saying what the PNP isn't. And the truth is, our constitution speaks to the fact that we are in fact a democratic socialist organization. There are many people who will give different reasons as to why we're not. A part of being democratic socialist is also about our value system and not allowing people, irrespective of their plight, their social situation, to, you know, be so vulnerable to inducements of different forms. And so we believe that we have to start the reculturing process, and we have to be aggressive about it, as aggressive as we are about other things like crime and corruption, because we are actually not just losing the soul of our party, we're losing the soul of our country.
Did you think the endowment fund was an attempt at vote buying?
Absolutely. And well, what followed that after the election, the statements made by Comrade Campbell, would, you know, basically solidify my thoughts in relation to that, because what he basically said on a news
Nationwide.
On Nationwide was that you know, the comrades voted against the fund, and that what they had identified were actually donors,
which is contradicting what Mark Golding said,
because he actually said that they had already raised this money. And so essentially what this is really saying to them is, you should have put us there and you would have gotten this. So that is vote buying.
How is that fundamentally different from, say, what Imani Duncan Price would have done in East Kingston?
In Central Kingston.
In Central Kingston, correction.
My understanding of the entrepreneurial program that Comrade Imani Duncan started in Central Kingston, and by the way, that was not an idea that just came to life during the campaign. She had been in that constituency and working with Comrade Ronald Thwaites for quite a while, and would have put on the table different initiatives to help to build out. You can say whether or not she was preparing for the future, and which is no, and had an unfair advantage. You can say that, but that, you know, she participated in a process of development of the people, taking into consideration.
She more taught someone how to fish there rather than
precisely, and so it is not the same as vote buying.
Do you see a difference between the two, and do you see either of the two as vote buying?
I think timing is important, because if you had something on the ground and the elections came, then it's difficult to say that it is vote buying because it was already in place. Yeah. But if you are entering an election campaign and then you come with this, it does come off as vote buying. Although I will tell you, you know,
sort of confirms the suspicion that was there before, right?
Yeah. Yes. Although I will tell you that I think the Bunting camp was actually answering a call, so to speak, because, I mean, there are several. One of the benefits of being a trade union leader, we have members from both camps in the union, and you would get reports that tell you that there are concerns about former workers of the PNP that they have been left.
The need is there, and that's why the message resonated.
And that's why it resonated.
this is so troubling because it is disingenuous. I can see how, you could assume that this was answering that call. But the reality is that there's a welfare commission of the party. And if you really wanted to answer that call, you would have worked through the structures of the party.
Just like we have two campaigns, you have two welfare commissions.
No, there's one welfare commission. There's a welfare commission of the party. And yes, it does work. And constituencies are supposed to actually have a welfare and outreach officer on their executive who would also address the needs by constituency and feed into the region and national organization to address the issues of workers. So though, yes, persons have not been doing their jobs, the way in which the RISE campaign would have gone about it to suggest that they were answering that call would be a little bit disingenuous. You would have had to work through the secretary.
Is that $10 million now available to Dr. Peter Phillips?
Based on what Comrade Campbell said, they never had it to begin with. It was just donors they identified on the condition that Peter Bunting would have.
Cryptocurrency.
Yes.
Helene Davis-White, thank you so much for joining us. You're staying with us, Venetia. Yes. We take a break and come back with more discussion on the way forward for the People's National Party. Welcome back to On Point. We're talking PNP internal politics. How do they move on beyond the election on Saturday? How do the two factions come back together for one strong PNP? Is it even possible? We still have with us Venetia Phillips, who is councillor for the Papine division, and we're also joined by political commentator Javion Nelson. How are you, Javion?
I'm good, thank
you. Javion,
happy to have you.
Good.
Javion, let me start with you. I mean, we were talking earlier about what Dayton Campbell had gone and said, right? And I thought to myself, it's just not a rational argument. And I asked you this question, I think you have answered it before. What is it that gets into someone that when they have a political stage, that they make these irrational statements? Which comment are you talking about? The one about the endowment fund and the money was not there, but it was just a promise.
Well, I mean, I think, when one is on a political stage, it's almost like any rally. You sometimes get very riled up and you try to say as much as you can to encourage people and to woo as many votes as possible for whatever purposes. I suppose the whole idea of an endowment fund was within that kind of vein of ensuring that you woo people and present policy ideas. Some might consider it as inducement / vote buying. Others may not see it as such, and I suppose the recent comments by Dayton about not having that on the table anymore may then confirm to some people that, well, this clearly was an attempt to just really woo votes. But I imagine that when you are fundraising, people will make pledges, and there are always conditions for certain pledges. I mean, countries do it with each other for different entities, for the UN, for the Global Fund, etc. So I imagine it's how does the PNP now go forward? If this is an important thing that really needs to happen, because I think we have all acknowledged that there are delegates, there are party workers who are in serious need of support, and if there's a welfare commission, how does the one PNP camp and the Rise United camp come together to see if they can then fundraise to get this 10 million and more to support party workers?
That 10 million was contingent on Peter Bunting winning this election. And I think one of the things that I do want to look at is the two men. A lot of the messaging that we talk about that resonated with almost half of the PNP delegates, a lot of that messaging was about the fact that Peter Phillips couldn't beat an Andrew Holness. Speak to that for me.
Well, I mean, a lot of the PNP, the one PNP / Rise United campaign was about who can win and who is better and fighting for the heart and soul of the People's National Party, which I believe the media must now begin to talk to the PNP about. What exactly is his heart and soul that has been lost for so long that now Peter Phillips as the leader will have to reignite within the party? I think, if you look at the polls, both teams said that they can win Andrew Holness, and I mean, when you listen to Peter Phillips after the votes were announced, he spoke again to that. But I think if you look at the polls that we have seen nationally, they sort of suggest that either way the PNP would have been in a real pickle to really beat Andrew Holness. So it was really about, as many commentators have said, who will beat and who will lose better to Andrew Holness if an election is called anytime soon. I mean, in politics, we know anything can change at any point. We've seen that before. We've seen that in 2016, for example, with the People's National Party, where we thought that they could never ever lose that election. So certainly I think it's going to be about what both teams see as important for the party going forward. How do you address the internal issues which are clearly there, and I've heard too much denial from one PNP camp, and Dr. Peter Phillips, even since he's been crowned king of the party again. But I think it's about addressing those internal issues, dealing with the conventions that affect the party publicly, and then at the same time addressing national issues and ensuring that people can believe in the PNP. I mean, the PNP launched the covenant a year or so ago, and there's been barely any uptake of the covenant and the ideas in the covenant. And so certainly, if a political party is going to put forward ideas for us to believe in them, and worse now that you have put this huge brand behind it as democratic socialism, then you ought to then ensure that whatever you are selling to us as a people can be bought.
And so I need to ask Venetia, who will Dr. Peter Phillips need to be, and what will he need to change to make him a viable alternative?
Dr. Peter Phillips needs to be just who he is. Peter Phillips, let's take you back to when he was up against Portia Simpson Miller. I remember, because I was on her team, that Jamaica was almost hungry for a Peter Phillips then. Everybody saw him as Prime Minister material, and in fact he had more public support even than Comrade Simpson Miller. Though she was popular among the masses, he was actually seen by both the middle class and many of those in the, in the wider cross section as being the person likely to lead Jamaica at that time. Now the reality is that Peter Phillips is still here. In terms of the deliverables, he has proven himself to be the most rounded politician in the country we have, and certainly Peter Phillips just needs to get his team together and present to the people of Jamaica a plan that the people of Jamaica will actually find that kind of hope in.
Are you drinking your own Kool-Aid?
I'm not. No, I'm not going to ignore the polls, but polls, you would understand that polls are a snapshot, and we continue to say it. It is true, because a poll taken 6 months ago will not necessarily reflect the thoughts of persons 6 months later.
Except we're not talking about a single poll.
No.
We're talking about multiple polls from different sources,
and that
all
is
say
fine.
Something's not
that
electable.
Is fine. Different polls will speak to different issues, because we can't just sit here and just reference polls in terms of what they have said, because all the polls were not asking the same questions at the same time. All of them address different issues. So let's be very clear on that. One of the things that you might say was consistent was that it was, and it wouldn't be true either, it wasn't always speaking to Peter Phillips, the leader, and whether or not he could possibly overtake Andrew Holness. It was speaking to the PNP's viability, and because there were issues of credibility being raised about the PNP, and that was simply because the JLP had been successful in feeding a steady diet to the people of Jamaica that, look, we're both the same, we're not different, so they are corrupt too. So in response to corruption when raised...
Both parties
no,
are
it
corrupt,
isn't,
though.
But I'll tell you what has been a real problem.
But if you look at the allegations of corruption that have been made between both of them, I mean, you're almost running neck to neck.
Not exactly.
Wait, hold on. And we're gonna, don't forget it, I want to come there, but I don't want to leave the leader.
No, so let's go back to the leader let's go back to the leader for a second.
There are named deficiencies that people have identified with Peter Phillips. Deficiencies both external, people looking in, and internally. There are almost half of your people who didn't vote for Dr. Peter Phillips.
And you know what? In the interest of unity in the party, I'm not going to discuss, how we got where we got in terms of the results that we have, because we might hold different opinions on just how the numbers ended up the way they do. But as a comrade who is interested in unity, and I think it is counterproductive to the party for me to actually go into all of that when we are moving towards oneness. So I wouldn't want to go back there, but suffice it to say to you, though, that the public is no different from your delegates in that way, in terms of message and how they resonate. And so what the PNP has allowed the JLP to do is to have a consistent social media and traditional media campaign. The JLP, from the day they took office in 2016, they have been campaigning, which is not a bad thing. That's what political parties are supposed to do. So they're doing it simultaneously while they're in government. They have successfully been able to target the leader of the PNP. Once Dr. Phillips came into office, they just kept coming, and they're still going. And what has been happening is that the People's National Party has not been at that place where we are actually either responding to some of the propaganda, or actually putting the leader forward in a way that will mitigate against, you know, the onslaught, if you want to call it that, coming from the...
But let me ask you something to follow up with that, right? The social media thing, because I hear you, Venetia, right? But isn't one of the challenges with the PNP that even on the same social media, comrades just were attacking each other?
Yeah, that's the truth.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
you see a lot of attacks on social media among the comrades.
Even now.
Even now, even that the election has come and gone, you still see, you know, the battle lines are still drawn, and people are, and so hopefully today's meet and greet between Peter Phillips and Peter Bunting might begin to
But even those
address
have
some of
caused
that.
memes. People
Well,
are taking
I haven't even
pictures
seen
and
that.
seeing all kinds of
Oh dear.
things.
And it comes with the territory. I believe,
Absolutely.
though, the bleeding has happened, and I mean, I don't know that the bleeding, you know, we had some amount of bloodletting politically, and I believe that when we had the last contest, certainly with Portia Simpson Miller and Dr. Phillips, I believe that that was equally as harsh, and we were able to turn the corner on that. And the problem we're having now is a race against time, because we don't control the trigger for elections. And so what we will have to do coming out of conference is to ensure that comrades understand what is important. Yes, there are egos that are hurting and stuff, but the bigger picture must be to focus on the JLP and retaking power from the Jamaica Labour Party. And I think comrades are hungry enough for it to get up.
Jamion, is Dr. Phillips unpopular because of a smear campaign from the JLP?
No, I don't think so. I think the PNP and Dr. Phillips, their unpopularity is really their own doing. You know, I think if you look at the things that have been said, right? For example, let's go back again, because I like to talk about the covenant, right? If you look at the covenant that was done, was it last year or year before?
No, the covenant is not even available to you yet, but you're speaking to it because you have access. But go ahead.
No, man, it was published.
Yeah,
it was
it's
published
not
and done on the
available.
on the PNP's conference platform, right? And
It
the
is not
covenant
available.
presented a set of ideas to the people of Jamaica, and among the things that were there, for example, was this idea of a first in family scholarship for people to go to university, among several other things. And when you look at the discussion online and offline, and if you listen to the radio programs in the day, there was hardly any kind of positive discussion about the covenant from the vast majority of people. It's not even something that a lot of people are talking about. So I don't know if that's a
It is not available to
JLP
you yet,
reality
Javon.
that...
But
Let me just clarify.
I did hear about some
No,
of those
it's
things,
definitely.
so-
Let me just explain
Yeah.
first of all. And they say that is part of the problem with the PNP, not being able to respond to these things in a timely way, which is something we really have to fix. Now, the covenant was a concept created by the comrade leader when he took office, which was a consultative process. So we went across the country with a committee led by Comrade Basil Waite and members of Comrade Peter Bunting's team, Maureen Webber and others. What they did, it was a two-pronged approach. It took into consideration the views of civil society in general, as well as that of the comrades. Now, the document was presented in January to the party. Not yet made, because this is what will now inform, if you want to use the old-time term, because we're not using that anymore, the manifesto of the PNP. So what you have seen in that document form is something that was presented to the NEC now as all of the things that were collated from the feedback on the tour across the country. This took place in all 63 constituencies. And so that consultative process now, you are speaking to it because it's in the document form, but it was not really made public. It was not presented to Jamaica as a document of the PNP
So this
to
is
say
you
this is
getting general election ready?
yes, it is. Yes, it is. So we wanted to hear from not just the PNP ground, but from the ground in general. And so that consultation was not just with comrades, it was with civil society. And so the covenant, that might not necessarily be the name for election, but that's certainly, it will form the pact that we are putting forward to the people of Jamaica. It is going to be our commitment.
Right.
And so the name might be kept if the NEC keeps it, but that's what we dubbed it in order to undertake the consultative process across the country.
Let's look forward to general elections.
Yes.
As much as the internal challenge energized the People's National Party, no two ways about it. the way that it played out and continues to play out, the disunity within the party, the bitter comments, the fuel that was passed to the JLP for the general elections to come, people look on and say, if you can't handle your own business with some civility, why should I make you the next government? What do you say to them?
Political parties will go through phases like this. The JLP had their fair share of this, and we've seen it. I mean, there are always going to be regrettable moments in our politics, and yes, there has been some bruising. We have given ammunition to the Jamaica Labour Party. I believe that coming out of NEC post-conference, we will see a difference in terms of how comrades are able to relate. There are some things, the damage is done in relation to some of the stuff that you would have seen on social media, and it will come back to haunt us for sure. In a campaign, however, it is going to be up to those managing the People's National Party's campaign to create the message in such a way that will help us to mitigate the damage that has been done when the mudslinging took place during the contest. I don't believe that we're irredeemable where that is concerned, because if we have history to refer to in terms of both political parties and that kind of harshness, but more so what we want to do is to ensure that the 63 constituencies have candidates within them who are appealing to their core group in those dormitory areas. And Dr. Peter Phillips spent the last 2 years doing that almost seam-free. We have 95% of candidates already in place. The others, with about 2 or 3 constituencies for new candidates to be put in, all the others are really seats with candidates already in place. And so pretty much you can say that where candidates are concerned, the PNP is ready.
But Javen, you know what is concerning to me. I want your comment on it. We sit here and we talk about the parties being ready and this and that. We don't talk about issues as things. No, but is your party involved too, you know?
It's true.
Both parties. I mean, you're a young person. We're not talking about the issues.
Yeah, I mean, that's for me a big thing. And even for the PNP internal election, I would have hoped that there would have been much more discussion on the issues that are affecting the party and the issues affecting the Jamaican people. But quite a lot of the discussion was consumed and concentrated around who can win Andrew and who can't win Andrew Holness, etc. And I mean, going forward, I think the PNP is going to have a huge challenge in the upcoming election, because a lot of things were said. It's going to be just like 2006, and then in 2007, the JLP had so much content to create ads against the PNP, and I feel like it's coming back again, even if not an official part of the campaign. There are so many of us as Jamaicans who are tech savvy that we can just create ads and memes and all sorts of things that can be used against a party. But I think the PNP is going to have a huge challenge with some of the things that were said on the campaign trail, particularly by the One PNP camp, because they are now in power in the PNP. And I mean, there was a rhetoric around money and capitalism that I feel is going to hurt the party in some kind of way, and I think it's going to be important for them to begin to address those issues from now, long before an election is called, because it felt like an anti-money campaign in some way when, for example, you listen to dancehall music and reggae music, everybody's singing about how you want to get rich and go up on the hill and live in a big house and them kind of thing, which seemingly the PNP does not understand as well in terms of just communicating. So there's a communication issue that the PNP really has to address.
No, we are saying no.
But another issue though, right, is that the PNP is on record in this campaign saying that everybody bought votes.
Right, and that too is going to be a big issue for the PNP, and I don't know how they're going to address that one, especially since they were always the ones complaining. I mean, in Eastern Portland, for example, that was a huge thing that the PNP talked about, and I recall just recently, I think it was Donna Scott Motley who said this is an issue in terms of the vote buying, but they're not going to pursue it once the election is done as a sort of legal matter or internal issue.
The PNP is a democratic socialist party. Whether or not some believe that we are true to our principles, it remains to be debated. And so when you raise the issue of capitalism, it is not something that we're prepared to shy away from as a party. As you say, we will have the task of ensuring that we explain this to the Jamaican people in a way that they understand that in keeping with the message that we would want to resonate with the people of Jamaica. And so trust our campaign team to be able to manage the messaging of the PNP's campaign in a way that they will understand that yes, money is important. We're not anti-money, but we are saying that we cannot subject our people to the kind of system where their morals, their principles are out the window in exchange for money. That cannot be the way.
The PNP side in that, I think.
And that is debatable, but the reality is that we have to ensure that we start to reculture Jamaica to understand that principles and morals are critical to how we grow as a country and as a people.
What's for sure is there's a lot of mud to mop up.
We're going to have to leave it there. Venetia and Javian, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks, folks.
It has been a very interesting discussion and we have to continue it. Viewers, after the break, we'll come back with the numbers and the word on the street.
Welcome back to On Point. Last week, Hurricane Dorian ripped through the Bahamas. It left billions of dollars in damage and thousands of people homeless. It passed through the Bahamas as a Category 5 system. Take a look at the numbers.
A risk firm is estimating that Hurricane Dorian could cost insurance companies in the Caribbean up to US $3 billion. The UN says immediately after the hurricane lashed the Bahamas, there were some 70,000 people in need of urgent assistance. Hurricane Dorian broke several records, one of which saw it being the slowest moving hurricane over a 24-hour period, moving at a snail's pace of 1.6 miles per hour. The hurricane made landfall 6 times, 3 of which were in the Bahamas archipelago. Hurricane Dorian reached Category 5 status, clocking winds of up to 185 miles per hour, with gusts of up to 220 miles per hour. Dorian spent over 2 weeks as an active tropical storm in the Atlantic Ocean.
And our On Point team hit the streets and asked, do you think the PNP delegates made the right choice?
I think personally, Peter Phillips deserves him chance, you know. Yeah, prove to the country what him can do. Cause him do it before already. Yeah man, so give him a fair chance.
Them not make the right decision, you know. With that decision, right now, them entire party mash up. You see me, PNP can't come back now, none at all. PNP done for. PNP are the worst party right now as we speak. Labour right the thing there.
We live in a democratic society, you know. So if people vote that way, then that way it is.
None of them no make no difference.
No, not really. To be honest, they want to change a seat and change a people because people in the parliament and they, to me, Jamaica get want more development and they want more younger people, more younger minds to help the country grow bigger.
Give Mr. Phillips, Peter Phillips a chance because he's in for a long time. He's soon retired, so why not come out as a prime minister?
They did make the right choice.
Dennis, there's no two ways about it. There's a lot of mopping up of mud that needs to happen for the PNP to become a viable alternative to the Jamaica Labour Party.
I just think that there was too much mudslinging, and you see with the advent of social media now, it's not like when Peter Phillips challenged, you did not have so many people on social media. Now, I saw supporters of the party really saying some real nasty things about each other.
And the big issue with that is those comments are going to live forever.
Yeah.
Not only did we have the public's eyes seeing those things play out, this wasn't an argument between the two people in private quarters. This was for millions of eyes to see in the public.
It's on the record.
Screenshots
for the JLP to see and have copies of.
And I think the sad part of it is, as a country, we need a strong opposition. It's not okay for us to have a ruling party without that fire on their tail, knowing full well that my next election is not sure, that there is a party in waiting that the people feel is a real alternative. And as long as the PNP has this messy internal battle going on and this petty back and forth, they don't look like a viable alternative.
Yeah, and throughout the campaign, they have been admitting and accusing each other of vote buying, which is corruption. So they have been admitting publicly and openly and talking against each other on social media, accusing the party that they all represent of corruption.
And then you can't very well stand on moral ground thereafter and look at the Jamaica Labour Party and talk about all the scandals with any real credibility, knowing full well and admitting what would have happened in your own internal election. So it's just a whole lot of mess.
It's messy, and I'm just looking for, and the government maybe might call an election soon.
I'm over the politics right now. We're going to take leave of you. I've got to say thanks to the folks who made the show possible. Hard-working team back there. You can't see them, but I can. Thank you, gentlemen and ladies. And I've got to say also thanks to you for sitting in the chair next to me.
Thanks also, Patria.
I'm Patria K.
And I'm Dennis Chung. Until next week.
On Point was brought to you by Crow Jamaica.